Is there a contradiction between Acts 9 verse 7 and Acts 22 verse 9? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 22 verses 1 to 11. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Acts chapter 22 verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 22, beginning at verse 1. Brethren and fathers, hear my defense before you now. And when they heard that he spoke to them in the Hebrew language, they kept all the more silent. Then he said, I am indeed a Jew, born in Tarsus of Cilicia, but brought up in this city at the feet of Gamaliel, taught according to the strictness of our father's law, and was zealous towards God, as you all are today. I persecuted this way to the death, binding and delivering into prisons both men and women, as also the high priest bears me witness, and all the council of the elders, from whom I also received letters to the brethren, and went to Damascus to bring in chains even those who were there to Jerusalem to be punished. Now it happened, as I journeyed and came near Damascus, at about noon, suddenly a great light from heaven shone around me. And I fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to me, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So I answered, Who are you, Lord? And he said to me, I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting. And those who were with me indeed saw the light and were afraid, but they did not hear the voice of him who spoke to me. So I said, What shall I do, Lord? And the Lord said to me, Arise and go into Damascus, and there you will be told all things which are appointed for you to do. And since I could not see for the glory of that light, being led by the hand of those who were with me, I came into Damascus. Paul was at the temple in Jerusalem at the instructions of James and the elders of the church in Jerusalem in order that he might quell thoughts among the Jewish Christians and the Jews in general that he was preaching that it was sinful for a Jew to observe certain parts of the law of Moses like vows, feasts, circumcision, etc., while at the same time being a Christian. However, because it was Pentecost, that meant that there were Jews there from all over the world, including from areas where Paul had been preaching. They falsely charged Paul with bringing a Gentile into the temple grounds where they weren't allowed, which caused a riot. The Roman guards had to break up the mob, after which they arrested Paul and brought him to the Antonia fortress, which sat adjacent to the temple grounds. On the screen now is a picture of what the stairs up to the fortress would have looked like. It is from here that Paul was given permission to address the crowd and to give a defense for his actions. He begins by telling them his heritage. Because he was born in Tarsus, it may have been thought that being brought up there led Paul to reject the law of Moses. Paul said this wasn't true, for even though he was born in Tarsus, he was brought up in Jerusalem at the feet of Gamaliel, the man we met back in Acts chapter 5. Learning from this man, he was brought up in the strictness of the law of Moses and was very zealous towards it and God, meaning that keeping it played a very important role in Paul's life up to that point. We'll see this attitude come through when we get to some of Paul's epistles as well. His zealousness for the law was shown through his persecution of the way, meaning Christians. The high priest, who by that time had changed, but would almost certainly have known the actions concerning the council's treatment of early Christians, as well as the council itself, would be able to testify how Paul had been involved in this persecution and even had been given permission to travel to Damascus to round up the Christians there and bring them back to Jerusalem to be judged and punished. If Paul was this type of man, then what changed? Well, as we covered in chapter 9 and what Paul recounts here, it is what happened to him on the road to Damascus. From Acts 22, we learn some details about this event that we didn't get to from chapter 9, so I'd like us to reread Acts 9, verses 3 to 9. And as he journeyed, he came near Damascus, and suddenly a light shone around him from heaven. Then he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? The Lord said, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So he, trembling and astonished, said, Lord, what do you want me to do? Then the Lord said to him, Arise and go into the city, and you will be told what you must do. And the men who journeyed with him stood speechless, hearing a voice, but seeing no one. Then Saul arose from the ground, and when his eyes were opened, he saw no one. But they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And he was there 3 days without sight, and neither ate nor drank. Now, as we would expect, these stories sound similar because they're the retelling of actual events. From Acts 22, though, we find out that this event happened around noon, a fact we didn't get from Acts 9. Jesus, of course, revealed himself to Paul through a voice from heaven, asking why Paul was persecuting him. Paul didn't understand who this voice was, and so Jesus identified himself by name. However, Acts chapter 9, verse 7 appears to contain a contradiction, because Luke records there that the people who stood by were speechless, hearing the voice but seeing nothing. While Paul in Acts 22, verse 9, when recording this story, said that these people did not hear the voice. Is there an answer to the skeptics who charge the Bible with a contradiction here? Yes, as long as we fully understand what is being said. Let me ask you, can you hear someone speak, in other words, hear a noise, but not understand what is being said? And of course, the answer is yes. Could it be said then that you both heard and not heard something at the same time? Again, the answer is yes. When Paul recounts this story again in Acts 26, in verse 14 of that chapter, he says that Jesus spoke to him in the Hebrew language. So it is quite possible that the people traveling with Paul heard the voice, but didn't understand the words, or if they did speak Hebrew, that Jesus didn't allow them to understand the words because they were directed at Paul alone. Whatever the case, again, if we study the matter further, we find that there is a plausible explanation, and thus no contradiction whatsoever. Paul was told by Jesus to go to the city, and it will be told what he must do. That is where we will leave Paul's defense for this lesson. Please come back for the next lesson, where we will, the Lord willing, continue with this. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 22, verses 12 to 21, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.